Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, Content Audits for Inbound Marketing. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator here at Inflow. Today presenting, we are going to have Everett Sizemore, who is our Director of Research and Development and Special Projects at Inflow. And we will also have a Q&A with Everett after the webinar wraps up, along with Patrick and Gareth from URL Profiler. That seems pretty simple, so let's go ahead and have you get started. Thanks, Everett.
Thank you, Sarah. So just real quick about Inflow. We're an inbound marketing agency based in Denver, Colorado, serving a global client base. We work across all inbound marketing channels to help our clients reach their business goals. And give us a call if you need anything, but this isn't a sales call, so we'll move right along. Today I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty step-by-step process for everything here because I covered that in a Moz post last month, which I'll link to at the end in the resources. And if you haven't read it yet, I advise reading it. It gets into a lot greater detail about step-by-step processes. The purpose of this webinar is to take more of a high-level approach to the topic of content audits, the what and the why sort of thing. And this begins with defining what it is we're talking about here. These two very bright people have somewhat different interpretations of what it's like to do a content audit. Part of that, I believe, has to do with the difference between a content audit and a content inventory. Jeffrey Veen is clearly talking about an inventory of content, as the title of his 2002 post on Adaptive Path states, while Christina Halvorson titled her post, "The Content Inventory is Your Friend." What she's really talking about here is a content audit, because the part she finds enlightening are the recommendations that come from analyzing the data from the content inventory. Here's a content inventory from 2009. There is one tab with 4 columns, and the analysis portion consists of a notes column with no actionable recommendations. This by no means reflects poorly on brain traffic. At least they were doing them in 2009, which is more than I can say. But I merely show it to give you an idea of the evolution of this process. By 2012, we're starting to see that a content audit and a content inventory are really just two pieces of the same project. The first half involves collection of the data, so the inventory, and the second part involves the analysis of the data, i.e. the audit. So what we're calling a content audit today at Inflow incorporates content inventories, gap analysis, keyword research, and an arsenal of useful on-page or page-level metrics from a variety of sources. We're also including strategic page-by-page recommendations to tie into the greater content strategy, which we'll talk more about later. But some people, myself included at times, might look at this spreadsheet and get a headache, which is why we're using a different format for presentation of the findings, and I think it's very important. We'll cover that later on with an example of our executive summary of the document that we provide to clients. For now, though, let's start by answering the decision maker's first 2 questions. So that would be, why should we do a content audit, and what kind of ROI can we expect from it? So just a reminder, these slides will be available online, and you'll have access to a recording of the webinar, so don't worry about jotting down too many notes at this point. There are many more reasons to do a content audit than this, but these tend to be the most frequent ones, the most frequent benefits to come out of the process for us. Each of these general high-level reasons could also result in any number of more specific reasons, and we'll run through some examples of those real quick. The format for this in the next few slides is similar. In blue up top, you have the primary example of how a content audit has helped a real client in a very specific way. The checked items at the bottom are each of the 14 reasons to do a content audit that also apply in some way to this situation. For example, finding these legacy pages could help them escape a Panda penalty by finding the pages that need to be updated or removed from the index. They also point toward orphan files, which may not be using the same CSS files as the rest of the site, or may not even be part of the same content management system. Probably since it's stuck around unnoticed all this time. Or it could be a very strong page in terms of having external backlinks, which could inform our redirect strategy for it. This type of stuff might not come up in a technical audit, even if you crawl the site. And here's why. So this particular page showed a 200 status code. It got a bit of traffic, had the same URL structure because it was off of the root, and doesn't in any way alert someone that there might be a reason to look at it with human eyes outside of somebody doing a content audit. It's just sort of there, not showing up in any reports, not on anybody's radar. Yet it might be some orphaned HTML file written with clunky web page builders before anyone knew what CSS was. A page like this will come to your attention in a content audit when you sort by performance metrics like traffic, conversion rates, links, last update date, or publish date. Just some examples. So this could come to light in a technical audit or a content audit as well. Either way, getting rid of internal duplicate content and consolidating PageRank for non-canonical pages is going to help any website. Dan here points out some ROI resulting from a technical issue, even though the client was specifically asking for a content audit. So it's worth noting that technical SEO audits and content audits tie in with each other often. We generally like to do them together if possible. Content audits also help inform the content marketing strategies, the editorial content calendars, the paid advertising, and just about any other part of an inbound marketing program that we have a client going through. So typically we might start with a general overview of a client's site, and then we'll do audience personas, and then we'll move into a content audit in many situations. It just seems to be the sequence of events that works well for a lot of clients. So has anybody ever had this problem? Probably quite a few out there raising your hands. It happens when Google knows about a URL but can't access it. So if you're trying to remove pages from the index with a robots.txt disallow statement, keep your eye out for these types of listings. What you need to do here is give these pages a robots no index meta tag and unblock them from the robots text file, at least until Google caches the new version of the page with the no index tag. And a pro tip here, if you're just using Screaming Frog together URLs and are setting it to respect robots.txt, you may miss these pages that Google has indexed but which are blocked. So either allow Screaming Frog or whatever crawler you're using, we'll talk about some other crawler options later, allow them to check out pages blocked in the robots text file, or do what we do, which is to expand that list of URLs with any that were organic search engine landing pages from Google Analytics. You'll have to dedupe your final list of URLs, but it's worth the extra effort. And you can check with Patrick and Gavin later on, but I think URL Profiler may automate the deduping process anyway. So after taking an inventory of all content URLs on the domain, our strategist Rick Ramos outlined a plan to no index, follow, and remove from their sitemap many of the older blog pages that were no longer relevant and weren't candidates for a content refresh of some sort. Phases Design Studio, who's the client in this case, and we have their permission to share this, has great designers, by the way. They're based here in Denver. Camdra rocks. So we had a series of campaign-based landing pages dating back from 2006, and these pages typically had a life cycle of a few months but were never removed from the site or from Google's index. Rick had these pages 301 redirected to a few evergreen landing pages that would be updated whenever a new campaign was launched. A tactic that works really well on seasonal pages for e-commerce sites as well, like a 2014 New Year's resolution deals page could be consolidated. And in this situation, Phases Design Studio has a monthly free social media template and a monthly website template where they create it and just give it away to the community. And they're really nice templates, but they were creating a new page and a new URL every single month. So all we really did through the content audit, we recognized the problem and redirected everything to an evergreen landing page. And here's why we think it worked. The ratio of useful, relevant, unique content to thin, irrelevant, duplicate content was greatly improved. We did some other stuff. This is not the only thing we did, but this had immediate results. The page rank from dozens of expired campaign landing pages was consolidated into a relatively few evergreen landing pages via a 301 redirect and consolidation of all the internal linking signals. And the crawl budget is now being used more efficiently. So this improved the overall customer experience on the site, as well as organic search rankings for pretty important topic areas that were consolidated. So those are some of the reasons why you might want to do a content audit. But before we get into the nuts and bolts, which we will very soon, I wanted to take a moment and look at this from Google's perspective. This is Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, wearing Google Glass augmented reality glasses. And I chose this image so we can start to think of Google and Googlebot and Google's ranking algorithm as things that have been programmed by real people with their own interests, problems, and ideas. And in this case, the people at Google have a very big problem, and it keeps getting bigger every day. Back in 2008, TechCrunch reported that Google was processing about 20 petabytes of data each day. And the source of that estimate, by the way, if you want to look it up, was a white paper written by some folks at Google called MapReduce Simplified Data Processing on Large Clusters. I have no idea how much they're chewing through today, but I would imagine it's quite a bit more than they were processing back in 2008. Just to put it in some perspective here, all of the written works of mankind created since the beginning of recorded history have been said to add up to about 50 petabytes of information. This includes every language translation of every written word ever. I'm not sure how somebody figured that out or if it's even true, but either way, there's some sources in the slides if you look at the notes, and either way, 20 petabytes is a lot of data. So I can't imagine the money that Google spends or the resources to crawl, index, and rank all of the useless, outdated, unsupported, spammy, forgotten about, poorly written, rarely visited pages across all 635 million plus websites and 50 billion web pages out there. So it's no wonder that back in 2011, Google started taking the hatchet to the web with their Panda update, as lots of you are probably affected by. I know I have several sites that were affected by it. And is it any wonder that content farms, hence the original name that applied to Panda, the farmer update, is it any reason, any wonder why those were among the hardest hits? It's pretty clear what Google is going after with that. So all of this to say that you can and should put Googlebot on a diet of useful, engaging, high-quality content while he's, for lack of a better phrase, eating at your establishment. It would be good for you, Google, good for your users, and your bottom line. So let's talk about how to actually do that. First, we need to gather all of our data, and that means taking an inventory of your content and pulling in relevant data related to each URL, which will help you analyze and make actionable decisions later. At a minimum, you'll probably want to know about visits, conversions, backlinks, social shares, publish dates, Copyscape risk score, and the keywords from Google Webmaster Tools and Analytics for each URL. When I first started doing these, this was all a very manual process. I had dozens of data tabs connected to half a dozen APIs, was working in a painfully slow spreadsheet overburdened by complicated VLOOKUPs across multiple tabs. And you can forget using Google Docs for this because you'll be waiting an hour every time you sort a row. So here's what the process looked like a year ago. The first row here in this slide represents the gathering of URLs along with some other data. We would first crawl the site with Screaming Frog, then export all the search landing pages to page URLs, then export all the Google Webmaster Tools URLs, including their keywords. Then we would combine and dedupe all of the URLs in Excel, then import everything into a Google Docs spreadsheet and name the tab Content Audit. We'd grab the data from other sources through their APIs, each of which went into its own tab, and then we would write VLOOKUPs to pull the data from all the tabs into the columns corresponding to the URLs in the Content Audit tab. In short, it was a pain in the butt, and it took so long that we found it difficult to convince clients to pay what we needed to charge for it. Eventually, I worked with a developer to create an internal tool, which we still use sometimes, which would take a Screaming Frog export and combine the data with the data for each of the URLs from several sources, including Google Analytics, Moz, and Social Count. So this sped up the process considerably, but the tool was and still is buggy, and it seemed like things just broke down several times a week, and the upkeep was too much for a firm like us not specializing in the development of tools. But we were so close. We knew the data we wanted and which sources to get it from. We knew what to do with it once we had it, but getting all the data together in one place was proving to be difficult. So then I started playing around with the URL profiler. This tool closed the loop on our needs, which allowed us to streamline the process. And here's what it looks like from a high level now. First, we scan the site with Screaming Frog. Then we import the file into URL Profiler, which checks all of the other data sources and spits out a file we can open in Excel and start analyzing right away. And the tool made it even easier by integrating one-click importation of Screaming Frog files and easy integration with Google Analytics. So now we're at the point where we can do this and do these content audits in a time-effective and affordable way for our clients, which is really what we were trying to do the whole time. So now we're going to talk about how to put all the data together so it can be analyzed more efficiently and meaningfully. In the last slide, I mentioned that you can start analyzing right away with the export you'll get from URL Profiler. We've found for our purposes there are still a few data sources that have to be incorporated, and all of this is going to depend on what you want, what you're trying to get out of a content audit. Although URL Profiler does most of the combining of data for you, possibly all of it depending on your needs, we also take the opportunity in most content audits to do some keyword research and to assign keywords to all the important URLs on the site. To do this, we'll pull in keyword query and landing page data from 2 reports in Google Webmaster Tools, as well as the Google AdWords Keyword Planner. I put this into a pivot table so I can enter a URL and see all of the keywords it ranks for according to Google Webmaster Tools and Google Analytics, as well as the potential search volume for those keywords from AdWords. And when we get into a screen share later, I'll show you an example of that pivot table. So this helps me figure out which pages need to be optimized for which keyword. SEO has been doing this for a long time. Relevancy is always the determining factor in this for me, but we also look for relevant high volume keywords that show up in the keyword research, but for which the site doesn't yet rank. Going over how to do VLOOKUPs is outside the scope of the presentation. A lot of you probably already know how to do them. I've included a link to a great tutorial in the resources section at the end. It's just safe to say that if you're going to be doing content audits, you should probably know how to do them, or at least have access to someone who does. Caesar, pictured here, is our resident spreadsheet guru, and he, after I bugged him for a while, taught me how to do the basics. But I still use them for more complicated VLOOKUPs, which we may get into showing some of those in the screen share later as well. Some important things to remember is that we always try to keep the URL in column A of each sheet, which allows us to look at the same URL from a range of data in another sheet or another tab and bring over its related data for other columns in the same row. In the example here, we're on the Keyword Matrix tab, and we're taking the URL in row 2 of column A of this tab, and we're looking it up on the Content Audit tab. Then we're asking to display the title tag for that URL in row 2 of column C of the Keyword Matrix. Or you could just stick with the data from URL Profiler as it gets exported out of the box, which is sufficient for any content audit that doesn't involve a keyword research portion or a keyword matrix, which are quite a lot, actually, especially the larger sites. We don't get into keyword matrix and keyword research work on a really big site, and we'll talk more about why later. These are more for sites where we think we might be building more pages as opposed to pruning out a lot of pages, which tends to be the case lately. At some point, you're going to have to make the jump from what can be considered prep work to the actual analysis of the data, and this is where the fun starts. It looks daunting, but with a little dubstep, a lot of coffee, maybe some legally purchased marijuana if you're in Denver, and 3 monitors, it goes quite a bit faster. This guy has 4 monitors, but that's because he's on a PC and lives in Colorado. If anybody knows how to get 4 monitors on a MacBook, please let me know in the comments or something, because I've been trying to do it for a while. The first thing you need to do is figure out if you can bulk process some of the pages based on similar characteristics. And I'll give you an example. All URLs in the tag folder, so we're talking about a WordPress site that has tags, tag pages. These might be marked as removed by setting the robots meta tag to no index follow. Or you might mark all e-commerce pages with low conversion rates as improved conversion rate, which you can elaborate on later. The important thing is to get through big chunks fast, and then depending on how much time you have, you can take the scalpel and start digging in a more detailed way. And this way, huge sections of a site can be processed using the hatchet approach, which is very important for large, high-risk sites. And the more surgical approach can be used for certain types of pages or sections and certain types of websites. And you would continue along these lines until every URL on the site has been assigned an appropriate action and strategy. Now, as I was putting this slide together, it dawned on me that really what we have here, and I hope I don't confuse anyone, what we have here is a strategy column and a tactic column. The one currently labeled strategy should be tactic, and the one labeled action should be called strategy. I just haven't had time to switch everything around. And at any rate, those two, column A and column B, needs to be filled out for every single URL. And notice the ones that don't need, actually I won't say every, the ones that don't need more details are pages marked as keep as is, because nothing needs to be done. I've found that that's pretty rare that I mark a page as keep as is. In more recent audits, I've done away with the consolidate option because it can be represented just as well by marking the non-canonical page as remove, with the strategy being to 301 redirect them to the canonical page, which would either be set as improve or left as is, depending on the situation. So you really only have 3 basic choices: leave as is, improve, or remove. How you handle each of these decisions can be as varied as you want it to be. I've found that limiting the amount of variations found in what this screenshot is the strategy column leads to easier sorting and filtering of the data at other points in the process. For example, I might want to see all URLs that are to be removed from the index with a robots meta no index tag, so that I can add that they also should not be blocked in the robots text file due to the issue we talked about earlier. So then I could just sort the column or filter the column and get all of those. Whereas if I had a different strategy for, if every URL had its own unique strategy, that would be a lot more difficult to do. So some of the URLs are going to have their own unique strategy, because those are the important ones that you're really paying attention to, and others, entire sections, you can copy down. And once you've completed these 2 columns for each URL, you may want to see how many hours you have left for the project, if any. Depending on the scenario you're dealing with, you may want to focus more on a content audit tab or the keyword matrix tab, or by finding content gaps, for instance. A specific example, if the focus is supposed to be on the content audit tab because it's a big site with some low quality content risks of some sort. We'll go over how to identify that later. Actually, in the next slide, we'll get started on that. So if that's your situation, you could go back to all of those pages that you had marked as improved conversion rate and then provide more details about what can be changed in order to accomplish this. And in order to know where to spend your time, it helps to take a step back and assess the overall situation. We link to this in the resources section. You can see the URL here in the slide. It's just an online tool with some drop-down divs, really easy to use. And you can think of a content audit scenarios tool that we're showing here as a decision matrix to help you choose the right combination of tools and where to spend your time. You'll need to choose your column by site size and your row by situation, and this should land you in one of 12 cells. You just click the focus description to expand the div and see the recommended strategy for each situation. Obviously, we can't expect something like this to be spot on 100% of the time. That's where your own discretion comes in. But the recommended strategy for a recent client was to focus on pruning and improving the low quality pages. Once I dug in, their logical URL structure and the simple solution available allowed me to use the hatchet approach, which gave me more time to focus on a keyword matrix. I was going to go into a pet peeve of mine about putting products off the route, but looking at the time, I think I'll stick to the topic at hand. This slide's available if you want to see it. Very few sites are going to be larger than 10,000 pages and not have some major issues with low quality pages being indexed, at least in my experience. We've seen cases where sites with thousands of pages had very little penalty risk associated with thin, low quality or duplicate content. And in these cases, we can afford to spend a little less time figuring out which pages to improve and more on which, less time figuring out which to remove and more on which to improve. We probably wouldn't do a content gap analysis since sites of this size tend to have a pretty good keyword footprint already. If anything, we want fewer pages, not more. And we probably would be consolidating overlapping topics like 5 ways to choose a widget posted this year and then the 10 ways to choose a widget that was posted last year. We can also afford to pay some attention to the keyword rankings and targeted phrases on top pages, internal linking strategies, etc. There are always exceptions to the rule, but if you use this tool, it will at least help you get past the dreaded freezing feeling of not knowing where to start when you're looking into this gigantic spreadsheet. Here's another example, and in this case, the site is much smaller. They have some content-related penalty risks, so we're going to start right off with figuring out which pages can be improved under the assumption that we can afford to improve every page on the site if needed, because it's a smaller site. With larger websites, at some point, budget is going to be a problem. It'll get in the way of improving the whole site. And we're still going to match up the best pages with the best, most appropriate keywords in this case, because it's a smaller site. We'll do some keyword research. You can expect to do a lot more scalpel work on a site like this, and you could probably get it done in 15 hours or less. We'll go over, there's a bonus slide that talks about how long these things take, and the answer is it depends. Now these are the tough ones. What we're typically seeing here are sites whose entire business model has been disrupted by Panda and similar. I had one of these sites myself. USRecallNews.com would aggregate press releases that were distributed by various government agencies, the FDA, the USDA, the CPSC, and it worked really well back in 2008, but the site got crushed in the first Panda release. And I can't say it was a surprise because I wasn't truly providing any value that couldn't be had elsewhere. I just combined a bunch of government RSS feeds into one. And we're still getting clients coming into us whose business model isn't much different. Maybe they drop ship personalized gift items or health supplements. Maybe they list coupons or compare prices or indiscriminately allow user-generated content to get indexed. Whatever the case, at this scale, you're definitely going to need a hatchet. And in fact, you may even consider the possibility that there's no use in working with the site at all if they're not willing to make some serious investments in high-quality content, because you just can't have 2,000 dropship items with manufacturer descriptions or coupon codes with merchant descriptions anymore. And if your margin doesn't offer the budget to hire a copywriter, then there's a fundamental business model problem. But that's another presentation. The content auditing portion of the project is only the first piece, and analysis and recommendations come next, followed by implementation. Even if you're not the one physically implementing, you need to make sure it's done correctly. So we like to include an executive summary that just provides the executive team with everything they need to know, including the reasoning behind it. And theoretically, they should be able to forward the spreadsheet onto a project manager and say, do this. And that person can then assign tasks to developers and the content team to implement. So the bad news, obviously, is that content audits can be a huge project, pain in the butt. I actually kind of like them. The good news is they can be extremely helpful, and future content audits will go much faster because of what you've learned. So at Inflow, for instance, we had a lot of blog posts about things like the new hire and the food drive we did at Thanksgiving. And we want those to be on the site because we want people to see we're actively engaged in the community and that we've been doing this stuff for a long time. But nobody's going to go to Google and type Inflow Thanksgiving food drive 2012. So we preemptively no-index these, which keeps us from having to clean it all up later. Another option here would be to rel canonical all of them to an evergreen this month in search landing page. And again, all of this depends on other metrics like do they have lots of backlinks? Typically, we find that these types of pages have 0 backlinks. Don't worry, the presentation's not over. We're going to do some live screen sharing here in a second, and then we're going to do some Q&A. I have some bonus slides available. We may get to those depending on how the Q&A goes. Otherwise, they will be available on SlideShare. And if, let's see here. Let's go ahead and switch over to screen share now, and I'll show you a spreadsheet. So let's see. Here we go. So Sarah, can you just chat me, make sure that you can see this okay? Great. I've done some redacting here. This is actually a real client, and we got permission to take out a bunch of keywords and redact a bunch of things. So it may look a little weird, you know, product page, product name instead of an actual product name, brand name instead of a domain. But it's essentially the most recent content audit that we've done. This is a keyword matrix. It's what I was talking about before, the thing that we add. And you see here's the URL and page type column. You don't have to use that. I found it easy to use it because the architecture of the site was really logical, and I assigned a page type to everything very quickly. And you'll see here's the VLOOKUP that brings the title over from the content audit tab, and everything else here, this is brought over as well. I assign it a keyword to the page, and then a primary keyword, and then other keywords. I, in this case, have put required content level because we're working with copywriters with these people, and then here's the strategy for each, which was pulled over from the content audit tab, which we'll look at in a minute. Likewise with the description, etc. The content gaps out the keyword matrix as I'm looking things over. If I find that, okay, well wait, the keyword research says that lots of people are coming for these coupon names for your brand, but you don't have an offers page. That seems like a pretty easy win. Here's the content audit tab, and this is where you'd be doing most of your work. And so you'll see under action, we've got improve, leave as is, or remove. Those are really the only 3 things that are going to happen here. And that way you can, for instance, sort by remove or filter by remove, and then copy and paste everything over here, or do some other kind of VLOOKUP over here. And this will be your tab that you would send, for instance, to the content manager and say, all these pages are coming off the site, implement the strategy in column C, basically. Here's some analytics data that we pulled in just to add to it, but URL Profiler gets all the analytics data for us. I think I was looking for new URLs with this tab. Google Webmaster Tools export of top pages, Google Webmaster Tools export of top queries, and AdWords data. Now here's where all 3 of those tabs meet. There's a pivot table where, let me take a, I'm just going to copy a URL here. So up here, this is referencing the Google, the Google Webmaster Tools tabs. So I would just put in a URL here and hit enter, Hopefully this will work. And then sort by this column, and it will tell me every keyword that Google is showing that this page is either ranked for and had impressions on or received clicks from, depending on what you export from Google Webmaster Tools. And this helps me with the keyword research in combination with the AdWords data. So let's go back over to the content audit, and real quick we could say, all right, we have this big long list of URLs, and let's assume that none of this other stuff was filled out. We don't have an action or a strategy. Then I could go in and say, let's see, this basically says show me all the products, and that's because the products are in their own folder. If all your products are off the root, sorry about your luck. It's going to take you a long time. Same with the categories. If all the categories are in a category folder, then you could sort that way. I know in this case that all products are going to need to be improved because these people were using pretty short, thin product descriptions. And they may have even been using manufacturer descriptions. So let's take a look at all the data you have access to. And I'll mention if anything doesn't come from URL Profiler and Screaming Frog, including the APIs that URL Profiler taps into. Got URL, the action and strategy I added, title, sessions, transactions, revenue, conversion rate. All of this is out of the box. The title, pixel width, description, canonical, there's link element. There are two canonicals actually. Both will end up being the same thing, but we're pulling in from multiple tools, so some of this overlaps. Word count, in-links, outlinks, external links, the HTTP status code if you need it, if you're checking things other than a 200. You've got social counts for Moz from tweets, from Twitter, Google+, Facebook, Pinterest. You've got Facebook likes, Facebook shares, Facebook comments, Moz, internal, external links. I really pay a lot of attention to the page authority score from Moz, in addition to the external equity links. You'll notice some pages will have higher page authority than others, even though neither has an external link, and that's most likely due to internal links, which still tells me something. If a lot of pages are linking to this internally, it might be an important page. I may want to take a scalpel to it and really look at it in depth. So you can slice and dice this data however you want. There's no right way to do it to get what you want. And a lot of it depends on the scenarios, but that scenarios document that I shared that is available online will help you figure out how to slice and dice the data and what to look for. So with that, I think we can probably move on to some Q&A. I'll leave the screen open in case we need to use it to point something out. Let me see. Patrick, and are you guys able to talk now, or do I need to give you access?
Hello.
Hello. Who's this?
Hi, that's Patrick here.
Hey, Patrick. Is Gareth around?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi,
So,
brilliant.
Sarah, since I'm already gabbing, I'll just introduce them. Everyone, you probably already know them. This is Gareth and Patrick from URL Profiler. It's Mr. Gareth Brown.
Hello.
And Mr. Patrick Hathaway. What questions do we have? It doesn't look like we've got a lot of questions in here, but I have one for you guys just to get it started with. Everyone, feel free to ask away, because right now we've only got a few questions, so if you ask, it'll probably get answered. This one's for Patrick or Gareth. Can URL Profiler pull in the Google Webmaster Tools data for each of the URLs, like the tabs that I was showing, top queries and top pages, so that's just one less step?
I'll take this one. Hi. this is something that we've actually today looked at. The Google Master Tools API set is very limited at the moment, so it looks like we might have to use something like a headless browser, like Phantom.js or Chrome, to log in as the user and pull the data back as a scrape rather than an API. Watch this space; it may be coming. If we can get it stable enough, then it may be something we do. Yeah.
I know several other people have tried that, and I think I shared the hack that we use in that Moz article, where if there's a snippet of JavaScript and you open up Chrome developer tools and you put in that script. I believe I shared. Yeah, it's really not the way to go in the long run. So I would love it if you guys figured it out for everyone.
The thing that worries us more, the thing that we discussed is the presentation of at keyword level. So the top so clicks and CTRs information, that's fine because that's at a single URL level. When you start to get into pulling back keywords or search search queries, we're going to have to do what you do, and that's put it into its own comma delimited list within a single cell. It's not very Excel friendly, but that's probably the only way forward.
Yeah, and
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. To me, it does. I should note that this is not. I can hear somebody typing, but this is definitely not your fault or something that
No.
Nobody's really been able to do this. It's a nightmare. I wish Google would figure it out, but.
So okay. I have a question for you. Can I ask a question?
Please.
So you're using obviously ScreamFrog, RTools, and other tool sets. There are a few sort of web-based content inventory audit tool sets. Is there a reason why you've not gone down the road of using those, but or have you used them previously?
There's a bonus slide in the deck that talks about other options, and then there's a resource slide that I think links to some of them. So like the A1 crawler that you run on a PC, then there's the Screaming Frog version you can run on a server, and then there was a couple others that we've used. Google has a big data tool. We've used a bunch of stuff to the short answer, but I think the reason let me think about this. I'm using URL Profiler because it's easier, really. That's what it comes down to. It's easier. The integration between Screaming Frog and URL Profiler right now works really well for me, and it reduces the amount of steps that I have to take, and it makes it easier for me to teach other people how to do this so I can focus on analyzing the data. Now we're at the point in user friendliness or user experience where I could train somebody how to pull in all the data and get everything ready for me, and then I can just walk in the door and start analyzing.
Yeah.
And that saves our clients money. It saves us money. Let's take a question from somebody out there. Let's see. We've got Ricardo is asking how to identify duplicate content. So that's a great question, and it's something that we can talk about with Patrick and Gavin too. Gareth. Right now, I run everything through the Copyscape API, and I pull in another tab, which you don't see for this particular client, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I pull in a tab for Copyscape risk score, and that's how I identify it. And so there will be a column in the content audit which, through VLOOKUP, references the Copyscape risk score from another tab. And as long as I have the URL in column A and I can match them up, then it gives me everything I need to know. I believe I use URL Profiler for that, though. And the problem that we're having, maybe there's a solution for this, is that we're only offering, we can't offer all of our clients a complete Copyscape scan because there's a cost associated with it. And when you're dealing with websites with millions of pages, the cost can be really high. So we run 100 URLs by default. And that way we can look for patterns. And if it appears that you've got this issue on a lot of different pages, then we'll know either we run the whole site or we fix the whole site and just approach it knowing that all the product pages, for instance, use manufacturer descriptions. So right now in the Content Audit tab, I may come across duplicate content issues as I'm browsing, but I really need that Copyscape tab down here in order to look for duplicate content, which is a very important part of this. So, Patrick and Gareth, can you tell us about how URL Profiler works with Copyscape, or how anything you might have planned for future updates?
Yeah, I mean, it pulls in. Yeah, uses. It's a direct link to their premium API. As you say, it's really expensive though. I think it's 5 cents a lookup. So yeah, I think the approach you're taking to doing the top 100 is probably the right approach. I think when we've done audits in the past, with the type of site that we're looking at now, it doesn't take very long to realise that everything's manufacturer content. It's the outliers, isn't it? That's the problem normally. The ones you don't, they've all best intentions. They've been and written the first 30 pages and then got bored and then gone off and just copied and pasted.
Yeah.
There is at the moment, there's no cheap solution. Copyscape is without the doubt the best solution. The other alternative is to fire up Scrapebox and scrape it back, but that's not great. It's time consuming, requires a lot of VLOOKUPs.
So here, something I would love to see from URL Profiler is the ability to, it's not that big of a deal because I can import 2 different lists, but then I'm working with 2 different export files and I've got to combine them and everything. If I could somehow tell URL Profiler only check this many URLs through Copyscape, because by default it's just going to want to check all of them.
Yeah.
And that way we could say only check 100, and it'll just be a little easier for us. Yep. I hope that answers your question, Ricardo. They're always just looking at the page as well, so nothing beats having a hard look at the page and copying and pasting some quotes from various pages into Google and seeing if you can diagnose an issue there. Here's a question from Jane. For a blog website, would you recommend no indexing or no following old, unpopular posts, or both no follow, no index? So I rarely see any reason to no follow anything. I typically no index, comma, follow. Part of that is because if you no follow it, then you're just putting up a roadblock in front of the spider. You're not allowing PageRank to flow through your site in an organic way. There are always exceptions to the rule, but with the way you phrase this question, I would say that in this case I would no index and allow it to be followed. We have a question from Tom who says, if your products are on your root domain, do you recommend moving to a product section? I'm glad you asked this. It's something I wanted to cover, but we kind of flew through some of this and didn't get to some of the bonus slides, which we may even end up being able to go back to. But it depends. If it's an old, established site, you're doing well, you have no plans in the immediate future to move to a different platform, then I would not risk it. I would not rock the boat just to get the products into a product folder if they're on the root. Magento is an example of something that puts them in the root often. And there's a fix for that in the slides. There's a bonus slide with a link to fix this for BigCommerce and Magento. And I think Volusion does it by default. If, however, you're going to switch to a new platform, or if it's a new site, or you don't have any traffic right now anyway, then in those cases I would say, yeah, go ahead and do it. Take the opportunity to get this done right so that future diagnostics are a little bit easier for everyone. And I just think it makes a more logical site architecture. Don't forget to do your 301s. Marie says, hey, thanks for the great presentation. You're welcome, Marie. Thank you. How do you include videos, pictures, etc. that are not text-based? So that is going, I'll let Gareth speak to this as well, but from my end, that starts with the crawler. I often use Screaming Frog, though I've used other crawlers too, and you can tell them what to crawl, which URLs to pick up. When you pull the data in, though, let's say it's a video. Are you looking for the video page that the video is embedded on? That will definitely come in. If you're looking for an SWF file or something like that, you can pull that in, but it won't have any metrics. Images, so like say JPEG and PNG files, you could pull those in too. Screaming Frog will bring those in, but they're not going to have any traffic or links or any of those kind of metrics because they're not a web page. Really, our content audits are designed to discover web pages that are out there. But if you want to discover other content assets, then that's more of a content inventory, and all you have to do is allow the spider to crawl everything on the site. You could also do an export from a CMS. That's something we do often on very large e-commerce sites. You could do an export from a SQL database, for instance, of all of the content assets on the site and pull them into here.
Yep, I agree with that.
Marie has another question about how to implement rel canonical and where. It's a little bit outside of the scope of this, but the rel canonical tag goes in the HTML header of the web page, and let's say you're consolidating pages. Let's say you've got some paginated pages, or you've got articles that are pretty much the same thing. One's a print version or whatever. Then both of them would have the same rel canonical tag pointing to the canonical or the main version of the page. There are several articles out there from the Google Webmaster Tools team and from Moz that deal with rel canonical tags, how to use them, proper syntax, etc. So I would definitely look that up. There's a Patrick question here. What can you use to crawl huge websites besides Screaming Frog? I'm going to say A1 web crawler, but I don't know. What else, Patrick?
Yeah, so there's a few big ones which are sort of set up specifically for large crawls for big sites with hundreds of thousands, millions of URLs. Deep Crawl is one of them. They're a UK-based company as well, and there's one called Botify, which they're based in France. They've got a log file analyzer and a crawler, and both of these are like big. So they've got distributed crawlers across many servers. So it's not desktop-based in the same way that Screaming Frog is. But one of the things you need to bear in mind with this is they do take a long time if you're going to be crawling big sites. So, for instance, with Deep Crawl, if you're putting a million-page site through, it's going to take about 3 weeks to get back to you. So it's not kind of the instant gratification you get with Screaming Frog. One of the other things you can do if you do have a big site and you do still want to use Screaming Frog is you can go into one of their config files and you can edit the amount of RAM which it allows the tool to use. So I think it's by default set to 512. You can up it to a gig or 4 gig, however much spare space you've got. So there's Deep Crawl is one of them. Botify is another one, and there is one more called Strucker, which is spelled STRUCR. They can also do quite a lot of pages, although that seems more of a technical tool rather than an SEO tool. If you go to allseosoftware.com, is a site made by Aleda Solis, which has got all sorts of different SEO tools, and I think it's in the on-page section of there. They've got all of these with links all through to them. So there's a few other options as well, but those are kind of the main ones for big sites.
Great. Could you just repeat the names of the tools real quick? So somebody mentioned that they didn't have time to jot it down.
Yeah, so Deep is one of them. Botify, that's B-O-T-I-F-Y, and Strucker is the final one, S-T-R-U-C-R. But like I say, go to allseosoftware.com and you'll find them all on there.
Great. Sorry, guys, I'm cycling through some slides, and I wanted to start the Let's just do this. There you go. So I will try and add those tools to this list before I upload this to SlideShare, so that those will be on here as well. Maybe Patrick can email those to me or help me out with them. We've used import.io for certain things. Kimono's kind of cool for getting certain types of data off the page. A1 Website Analyzer by Microsys. A lot of people use that one for bigger sites. And Screaming Frog can also be, I think, installed on a server. So that probably helps. This, while we're in here, this is how you change the setting in BigCommerce to get the products folder in. And this is for Magento. If you go to this, you'll find a tutorial on that. And let's see. This is how long these things take us. An easy site, 15 hours. Really difficult site, 45 hours. We just signed on with a client, though, that we're pretty sure is going to take close to 60 hours. And in this case, what they're doing is they're using their log files, and they're using Splunk to parse their log files and give us URLs that way. It's such a large site that they can't even, they're over Google Analytics threshold. There's no way that Screaming Frog or any of these other crawlers are going to be able to crawl them unless we do it in sections. That's always another option, is you can crawl in sections, and you can run through URL Profiler in sections as well. And someone's asking, any thoughts on pulling body copy into this matrix? Is this something URL Profiler could potentially do? So we would have a cell for the body copy. Gareth or Patrick?
Yeah, I wonder what sort of use putting all the body copy in would have. I mean, your limits are going to be Excel. Excel has there is actually a character limit within a cell, and we've hit this through testing. I think it's 32,000 characters, which we end up having to cut off. So if you're doing long form content, you're going to end up with problems. It's also going to make the size of the Excel sheet just humongous. It's probably big enough. By the time you've done a full audit on 20,000 pages, it's going to be a pretty big spreadsheet anyway. Mm-hmm. If you're working on a Mac, I feel sorry for you. Euro Profile doesn't do it by default. You can use there's a custom scraper function in there, which you can enter the CSS class or an XPath selector, which will pull the copy in for you. That's probably the best way to do it. That's really why the custom scraper's in there, so you can pull bits of data in that we don't put in by default. That helps.
Anything, can I ask, just to verify, anything that so the file that you import from Screaming Frog, everything that's in that file will appear in the export from URL Profiler?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. So you can pull in anything you want through their custom fields.
Yep.
But okay. And I think that does it. We've answered the questions on here, and looks like we're about out of time. So thank you, both of you, very much for joining us and helping answer questions, and for the great product that you've put together that's made my life a lot easier. Patrick and Gareth, you guys rock. Thank you for everyone who's come over from the other side of the pond to, I don't know what time it is there, but thanks for listening and tuning in, and I'll let Sarah take it away.
Hi guys, again I'd like to say thank you all so much for attending. We're going to follow up by sending you guys a video of this webinar as well as on our blog, which is www.goinflow.com/blog. We're going to do another follow-up Q&A with Gareth and Patrick so we can make sure that everybody's questions are completely answered. And please follow us on Twitter at GoInflow and also URL Profiler. And if you weren't able to attend today and you're hoping to get this email to you, sorry, kind of the incentive to show up. But we will follow up on SlideShare, and we're also going to do some great stuff on the blog. So we will see you guys soon. Thank you again for attending. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Gareth.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for having us.